Let's see if, can you guys see my screen?
I can.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting program for you all. Some of my favorite people here to speak with us today about the next area of law firm culture. So today we're going to be talking about profitability in the post-COVID era. And now we're kind of entering this new era of what's next. And we're going to talk to some thought leaders today about what this means for our firms. So we have this awesome program. I've met with both our panelists, Bill Johnston and Peter Johnston, not related, and their names are different by a T. And I'll show you those in a minute, but want to just introduce them to you today. So our first presenter is Peter Johnston, and I am having trouble. Here we go. So Peter is one of my very old friends. I actually hired him at my last law firm that I was at, and he's a former litigation partner from a mid-sized firm based in Boston. He lives there now. He splits his time between Boston and Florida. While he was at his last firm, he was the chair of the comp committee for 3 years, as well as managing partner for 3 years. And we've worked with Peter several times on lots of joint ventures over the years. In 2001, he founded LPC, Law Practice Consultants, to focus on BD, client retention, management, and governance, including profitability analysis and compensation assessments. He's a speaker, writer, and LMA member, which I'm thankful for. Thanks, Peter. And he most enjoys working closely with managing partners on various strategic initiatives. Prior to going to law school, he received his 2 graduate degrees in both counseling and psychology, which have no doubt helped him working with our attorneys and our firms. Thank you, Peter, for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Next, we have Bill Johnston. Bill is the founder and president of W. Johnston Associates, a law firm management consulting firm. Bill assists law firms on a variety of strategic, financial, organizational, and leadership issues. For more than 20 years, Bill has served as a critical advisor to his clients, which range from focused on boutiques and regional firms to AmLaw 100 firms with national and international networks. Prior to establishing W. Johnston Associates, Bill served for 8 years as the director of strategic planning at Cravath, Swaine, and Moore, where his responsibilities included, among other things, working with firm leadership on strategic development and implementation, financial matters, and competitive intelligence. This is actually where I met Bill for the first time. He was my professor at GW. He was part of the faculty, and he served as our profitability master, helping us understand law firm profitability. So thank you so much for being here today, Bill. I appreciate both of you, and I'm really excited about our discussion. One more thing about Bill that I forgot to mention, but he was previously worked at Hildebrandt. Earlier in his career, he spent 12 years working on strategic development around M&As and peak financial performance. And he's actually written a book with Lisa Smith on the anatomy of law firm mergers with ABA. We're going to be diving into the merger discussion a little bit today too. So thank you both. Very appreciative to have your time and attention today. So today we're going to be talking about the current state and trends impacting our industry, overall business operations, and how we can prepare our firms for the future. So I'd like to dive in first by kind of talking a little bit about what our current state looks like, what the current affairs of our industry is. And since we've now gotten past this first half of the year, which has been a little bit of a dumpster fire, I'd like to really focus on what this next 6 to 18 months looks like. What is your sense on how firms have performed? Perhaps more important, how do things look heading into the second half of 2020? Bill, let's go ahead and start with you on this one.
Sure. So thank you for having me. I guess in the first half of the year, it was a Dickens who wrote Tale of Two Cities. It was the tale of two quarters. So the first quarter of 2020, things were going pretty well. cash was flowing into firms, new matters were flowing into firms, clients were flowing into firms. Everything looked great for most of the first quarter. And then sort of mid-March, early April, it was like the spigot just got turned off and things just changed immediately. It was almost overnight. And law firms had to react quickly. Although, I think we probably saw the news about COVID and we were kind of monitoring it. You didn't really get a feel for what was happening until it actually happened. And at that point it was, okay, we have to act immediately. And what was interesting is I think firms to a certain extent went back to their old playbook. So when we had the downturn in 2008, 9, 10, certain things were done, in terms of making compensation adjustments, furloughing, layoffs, cutting all discretionary expenses and the like. And firms pulled out that playbook and had experienced it not too long ago and said, we're going to do these things again. And for the most part, it actually worked pretty well from what I can tell. And we'll talk, I know later in the discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about that PPP loan program, but there was also that, which was a little bit of an added wrinkle. So it was interesting. And what I think we found is as firms wrapped up the second quarter, they actually felt okay. They had made that immediate transition to the work from home, which was sort of jarring, but it seemed to work okay. After you get through the technological hiccups, everything started moving forward. And there was a level of comfort that things were okay. Now that said, it's almost like we're doing this day by day. For each day that passes, it's almost like with COVID-19 and getting a vaccine, with each day that passes, we're closing the gap, hopefully until something is better. But it's day by day. And I tell you right now, the managing partners that I'm speaking with are looking at the next half of 2020, and there's just a tremendous degree of uncertainty. Like they just don't know, are things going to get better? Is it going to be kind of status quo and a little bit quiet, or are things going to get worse? And there's almost no way of telling right now. So the first half, pretty good, probably better than expected for a lot of firms. The second half, a pretty high degree of uncertainty. That's sort of what I'm seeing just at the highest level right now.
Yeah, and Bill, I'm seeing the same thing, and you work with larger firms than I do for the most part, and I've seen that in the smaller firms as well. They had a pretty good pipeline of receivables and WIP, and clients back then in the first quarter and second quarter actually had money to pay, and they were paying. And we found, I think, and we're going to talk about the working from home phenomenon, that it actually worked. Working from home worked. And this is something that didn't happen in the last recession because we didn't have the technology that we have today. I think the challenge, to your point, is the third and fourth quarters and trying to fill a pipeline with new work and new clients in a socially distant environment. And going back to the work from home, I'm not sure that as we go forward, and Jill and I had this brief discussion before we got on, I'm not so sure that working from home is going to be as productive in the second half of the year as it was in the first. The novelty is sort of worn off. And just a comment, by the way, this shows such a small world. Jill was your student, and actually I was Bill's student. I hired Bill when I was the managing partner in Boston 23 years ago, and now we're sitting on the same panel.
There it is.
There you go.
Love that. The circle of trust.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you guys think have been the key trends in the law firm financial management? Have firms been doing anything particularly innovative with respect to expense control or the revenue side of things?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen anything particularly innovative. And of course, anybody that's listening in that I've worked with who has done something innovative, I apologize, because you're probably saying, what do you mean? We did the most innovative thing. I just don't know that I've seen a lot of innovation, and perhaps because so much of it was reactionary. You had to do things immediately. It wasn't like we had to think, oh, what could be really cool that we could do? It was, oh my gosh, we've got an issue, let's fix it. So I don't know that there was as much innovation. But then again, the old playbook seemed to have worked. So it's been okay. I think we're probably going to get to a point now, maybe over the next 6 months, where firms get more innovative. Like it's almost like you get through the crisis, things settle down a little bit and stabilize. And okay, let's now take a step back and see if there's anything different than we could do in terms of how we're going to address expenses and the like. Perhaps though, one of the reasons why there are limitations on kind of expense management innovation, or like financial management innovation, is because so many of the expenses are essentially fixed in law firms, you know, and you've got compensation, and firms have been pretty creative about compensation. The one thing actually I'd say that I thought was interesting is when so many firms were making compensation adjustments, they were doing it. It was almost like one firm did it. I can't remember which one, but it seemed like it was one of the ML 100 firms did something where they said, we're going to cut compensation for all people above a certain threshold of compensation. So it's not going to go top to bottom throughout the organization. We're going to protect the people that earn less within the firm. And then that seemed to expand throughout the other firms. I thought, okay, that was kind of innovative. We may see something over the next 6 months, particularly depending upon how revenues shake out and, you know, how things look financially. Firms may have to get a bit more creative in terms of what they're doing to manage their financials.
Yeah, I would agree that there's nothing innovative. I think what's innovative is that some firms actually started implementing things that they should have done a long time ago. And they were more, I think in this situation, fear is not necessarily a healthy motivator, but it works. And I think we saw firms respond a lot more quickly than I thought they were going to respond. And to your point, Bill, I do think that for the most part, firms are pretty good at controlling expenses. This is still going to be top line driven. That's going to be the challenge. And while PPP has allowed firms to avoid or to defer layoffs, et cetera, not that that's innovative, but it's going to be done more quickly than firms deal with layoffs and have dealt with layoffs and overcapacity in the past. And to the extent it's innovative, I agree. Cutting compensation is always a challenge, and it is innovative because I haven't really seen that since, I guess, about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You both mentioned PPP loans. Do you think that for the firms that did that, it helped? Do you think there was a reluctance by firms to actually engage in the PPP loans, whether that be because of the rules? I mean, those have been changing and fluctuating daily, it seems, or just the public perception because they did release some of that information, or they said they were going to release it at least.
Well, no one has experienced COVID before, and so no one has had a niche practice in how to implement and monitor PPP. And at first, the question was, what's PPP? What does it mean? And no one actually knew what it meant, even the people who were drafting the statute and legislation. So I think initially everybody was from Missouri, the show me state, what does this mean? But as firms started to understand what it meant, what you had to do, and there really was no stigma attached. This was really an assistance to them to help maintain full employment. I think there was less reticence to get involved with it. I think that some of the larger firms took some heat initially. It was a PR snafu, but then they got let off the hook because then you had McDonald's and some larger corporations that start taking the heat instead. But I think that the bigger issue is going to be what happens when the PPP ends. What happens in the future?
I can tell you, I'm within my client base, and again, during the course of a normal year, I probably work with about 20 law firms. So it's a relatively focused group, and some of them real small firms up to firms that are very large. Within that group, the firms that were eligible for the PPP, because obviously there was that kind of employee cutoff. Every one of them applied for the PPP loan. One of the clients reversed. I think they saw that there was going to be some pushback internally within the firm. They were a little bit concerned about the public relations aspects of it as well. And frankly, I think they took a look at their finances and said, we don't necessarily need it. And as a result, they reversed. Every other one of my clients went forward with the PPP loan, took it, and I think that it helped them quite a bit in the first half of the year. But what's interesting is it helped bolster their finances in the first half of the year. I think some partners may not recognize that similar bolstering may not exist in the second half of the year. You know, you received whatever, $5 million to make up a number in the first half of the year. That was great. That really helped us quite a bit. But you have a $5 million hole for the next 6 months because that $5 million won't be there again for you.
Yeah. So as it relates to the partners and their compensation, what do you think firms are doing to increase that profitability?
Well, it's always a challenge. I mean, the easy and quick answer is reducing expenses and a laser-like focus on blocking and tackling. And I've seen firms that take, and you've all worked in law firms, and you know, timekeeping, contemporaneous timekeeping is a challenge, and it's difficult to close a month by the second business day of the succeeding month and getting the bills out, et cetera. And I've seen laser-like focus and management concentrating on getting the time and getting the bills out, creating opportunities for clients to pay bills more easily. And I think all bills now that are sent out, excuse me, by law firms have either wiring instructions or credit card information. So the cutting of the expenses and the increasing the efforts to bring money in. And the other thing to do to increase profitability, which sounds almost like a non sequitur, is if you reduce pay, you can increase profit. But then what do you do with the profit? And we're going to talk about how that profit is distributed among producing partners.
I think it comes down, in terms of profitability for 2020, a lot of it comes down to just having very good financial hygiene. And I'm sure Peter and I, we've been probably preaching about financial hygiene going back 25 years. Got to get your time in on time so the time doesn't fall through the cracks. You have to get the bills out on a timely basis, and you have to go out and collect the bills and follow up with clients who aren't paying their bills. A lot of firms do that. It's like sort of the ordinary course. They run their business like a business, and they do all of the right things to make that happen, and that's great because they're well positioned. Those who haven't focused on financial hygiene, if they find themselves in 2020 in sort of a financial crisis period, it's really hard, I think, to get partners who have been doing things sort of loosely for, say, a career to change and say, okay, financial hygiene is really important. So those who have focused on financial hygiene are in a much better position. The other thing that I think I'm saying in terms of maintaining or increasing profitability is, you know, in terms of the net income, they're simply changing the denominator of how many people are sharing in the net income, which effectively means they're counseling out people who probably many of them should have been counseled out years ago. And they're taking now a harder look at their partnership structure to make sure that everybody who is sharing in the net income of the firm is, you know, meets the criteria to be an equity partner within the firm. So that's going on as well.
Right.
So one thing that we saw back in 2008, a lot of my peers have noted this as well. Our partners had the best year that they had in a long time. And it was because they did all the things that you're talking about. But do you think that's going to continue as a trend during this downturn as well, that towards the end of the year, our partners will be in a better financial position than they thought because they have been taking all these mitigations?
I don't think so.
I was waiting for you to answer first, Peter.
What's that?
I wanted to hear you answer first.
I don't think so, because you know, you can only bill for the clients that you represent. And if there are less clients, there are going to be less bills. So you can have the greatest hygiene in the world, but if you don't have a lot to bill, then there's not a lot of money coming in. And the profitability, although on a percentage basis may be very high in terms of pure dollars, it's not. And yeah, I think will be marginally better, but I think you're going to see a shrinking client base and rate pressure, et cetera. So I don't think ultimately the dollars are going to be greater.
I think throughout this, I get a sense that law firm leadership has done an excellent job in terms of transparency and communication to making sure everybody is aware of what's going on, what steps the firm is taking, but also communicating with partners to get them to understand the financial realities of 2020. And it seems like more and more firms are, they're not not embracing, but they're understanding and accepting that the great results that they experienced, say, in 2017, 18, and 19 are not going to be repeated in 2020 unless something miraculous happens in the second half of the year. I'm getting a sense that more and more firms are not comfortable, but accepting that their net income this year, they may miss budget by 10 to 20% of their net income budget. And so as a result, the average compensation is going to be going down across the board. So, and that's just, the 15 or the 10 to 20% drop in net income. That's because of the way the financial model works. That's really just losing 6, 7, 8% of top line revenue has that big of an impact on the bottom line. But I think there's a general acceptance that if firms can get through the year, breathe a sigh of relief that their net income dropped by 12%, I think they're actually going to be relatively pleased and happy. Not ecstatic, but relatively pleased.
Perhaps how they distribute it may create some challenges, but yes.
Yep.
So I forgot to mention, but we do have chat feature on here. So if anybody has questions, I'll try to get to those throughout the conversation. If not, we'll address those later in a follow-up, and we'll ask our panelists to weigh in on those. So feel free to use that Q&A. Let's kind of pivot now and talk about the industry and kind of an outlook for the industry. As we talk about M&As, particularly, Altman Wild's been tracking those, I think, for 12 years, and there's been this consistent incline up. And it seems like the lateral activities continue to occur, albeit a little bit slower from a pace perspective, but law firm mergers have pretty much halted, right? I know of a few that are just kind of stuck right now. How has this merger activity been impacted by COVID? And do you expect to see more mergers either continue this year or happen and be pushed to 2021?
I think, on the two pieces. So the lateral piece and then the merger piece, when things sort of changed in mid-March, early April, I thought to myself, all right, that's the end of merger activity for the rest of the year. And I also thought that was the end of lateral activity for the most part for the rest of the year. So what's surprised me, and I was dead wrong on this, and Jill, you mentioned that I used to work for Hildebrandt. I was talking with Brad Hildebrandt, and I said, I don't think there's going to be very much lateral activity. He's like, oh no, you're wrong. He's like, their lateral activity is going to go on, and this will not be repeated. And hopefully Brad's not on this call, but he was right. So there has been lateral activity, and what I think is interesting about it is the volume is down, but the people that are moving laterally it doesn't appear that they're fleeing a burning ship. Like they're going from good firm to good firm. Like it's interesting lateral activity. It's not like, oh, this firm is, well, I guess there is one firm out there that seems to be falling apart, but for the most part, firms are not falling apart and people fleeing. It's just, I'm at a really good firm. That's a great opportunity. I'm going to make a run. I'm going to make a run for it. And there might be a compensation adjustment. Who the heck knows? But there has been lateral activity. On the merger piece, that has really stopped for the most part. And I think, since I've done, you mentioned the merger book that Lisa and I did, and I've done so much mergers over the course of my career, I know that these are they're very personal discussions and negotiations. In part, I think it's because of the way the law firm is set up as opposed to a corporation. The law firm, they are the shareholders, so they own the place. So there's a lot of, meeting in person. And if you can't meet in person comfortably, it's impossible to do some kind of a merger. And a number of these merger discussions take place because somebody just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to be in your city. I'd love to learn a bit more about your firm, want to get breakfast or want to get lunch. And then two people end up getting together and then it blossoms and blossoms. And that can't happen right now. So I think we're going to see few mergers take place through the remainder of this year. And I can tell you just within my little client base, I don't have any merger activity going on right now. So like I have no active merger discussions, which is interesting. And it's usually not like that. I usually have a couple of things going on. Going into 2021, I think firms will revisit some of their targeting approaches and think, okay, do we want to be in Cleveland? Just pick a city. Do I want to be in Cleveland? Yeah, that's really important to us strategically. Well, then during this kind of slow period, let's do targeting and let's learn about that market and identify the firms that we might possibly want to speak with once things get back to normal. And I think when that happens, whenever it is, I think we're going to see a pickup in merger activity. So there's going to be a real drop off this year, and it probably won't be 2021. It may be like 2022 and 2023. I think we're going to see a spike. The other little piece on the merger activity, and this isn't necessarily small firms and mid-sized firms, it could be for firms of any size. I think what we're going through right now is going to get some firms reevaluating whether or not they're best positioned by going it alone. And I generally counsel with my clients, you really should, think about merger a bit, but assume that no merger ever happens. You're on your own to fail or succeed. I think some firms might be looking at this and saying, we may be more on the fail side. And as a result, we actually have to be more open to discussions and open to inquiries from other firms. So I think it's going to take a little while, but I think we're going to see an increase.
Yeah, going back to what's happening now, I would agree with laterals. The headhunters that I've been speaking to, recruiters, are actually fairly busy. And in terms of the mergers, the serendipitous meetings that you discussed, Bill, that often are the genesis of business development opportunities as well are not happening. They're not going to conferences together, and they're not having the opportunity to have those type of meetings. And clearly, compensation is key with mergers, but so is culture. Overused word, but very important. And you can't have a cultural fit without having the opportunity to be with folks. So what I'm finding is, in some of the relatively small firms are concerned that they can't go it alone, and they know of other small firms in the same geographic area. So it's not the challenge of getting to know you necessarily. And there may be some motivation because of perceived financial weakness in both. And so there is, I see some combinations that will take place, smaller firms to shore up weaknesses and maximize potential, but with people who are relatively well known to each other, as opposed to, a larger firm moving into Cleveland and speaking to a Cleveland firm with whom or with which they have no real relationship. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to business operations. In a few months, most firms are going to enter into that partner compensation season, which is so much fun. Any predictions on how that's going to go?
Well, not well. Compensation is always fun, for law firms. If it's an objective system, then it's easy. If I do X, I get Y. And even now, there needs to be money left over in order to get that. But let's start with a recommendation that I think Bill shares with me, and that is that firms need to assess their compensation systems every few years to make sure that incentives and rewards are consistent with the overall goals and objectives. So they should be doing that anyhow. Now, crisis can create the opportunity or necessity to change those systems. And I'm seeing some changes to systems, whether it's guaranteed draw, et cetera, to reflect this conservative nature of law firms, which is we need to save money. We can't pay it all out in compensation. And I see that more and more firms are being conservative, which means that there will probably be more modest guaranteed salaries and more incentive-based performance bonuses. I don't see year-end bonus pools being as robust as they were, and firms need to set money aside for additional operating, that rainy day fund. And the challenge will be, we may talk about it, for those people who have outperformed but have still been cut, like everybody else, is there the opportunity or the expectation that they are not necessarily going to be made whole, but there will be differentiations among the producers. So it's going to be a challenging time.
It is going to be very challenging. It's going to be it's the wild, wild west. I had so right now in the middle of July, in the beginning of June, a managing partner reached out to me, and it was almost like can you believe it already? this is a firm that's on a typical like calendar year basis. And his comment was, I already have partners positioning themselves for compensation at the end of the year. So normally it's a fourth quarter exercise where everybody, you know, they'll position and, you know, they might write sort of I love me memos and send them into the compensation system, but they'll do everything that they can to ensure that they receive as fair a slice of the net income pie as possible. And he's like, it's a little bit early for this to be happening. I'm like, yeah, it is a bit early. I think in some firms, it's going to go firm by firm how well the compensation system goes at the end of this year, because it becomes, you know, is this a firm where there's a high degree of loyalty and we're all in this together and we're all going to get through it together, and we've dealt with bad things before and we're dealing with this now and we're going to have, you know, happy times in the future. If that's the case, then it may be an okay comp season for that firm. But if it's a firm that's much more focused on kind of eat what you kill, and, you know, I want to make sure that I earn as much as I possibly can, I think those are going to be some pretty nasty conversations, because the size of the pie, instead of being this big, is going to be this big. And it's just, there are going to be a fair number of mouths to feed and just not enough to go around. So I think it's going to be challenging. I am glad that I'm not on a compensation system or a compensation committee for a large firm, or really any law firm at the end of the year, because it's going to be a difficult year. The one caution that I've made to a couple of firms that I've talked, Peter, you mentioned that it's a good idea to review your compensation system every few years. There's been a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction that I've seen this year that we're dealing with this crisis, and as a result, we need to change our comp system. And I think, you know, if you have a good compensation system that has worked well, that people support, people trust, and people feel more or less good about at the end of the day, you're better off not ripping apart your comp system while we're in the midst of this. Wait till we get past it, hopefully sooner rather than later, and then reevaluate your comp system. Because if you make some changes to it now, perhaps to you know, push more of the pie to a certain group than to another, that can kind of, in the short term, that can like put out a fire, which is good, but long term, it may have a significant negative cultural impact upon the firm. So I think it's an area, again, where I think firms have to be really cautious. But yeah, it's going to be a wild end of the year, that's for sure.
You know, it's interesting. You have the tension between objective and subjective compensation systems, and now you got the people in the the people in the subjective pool camp saying, "Look, you want to eat what you kill. You got to eat what you kill. You litigators, how do you like it now?" And there is that debate going forward. So those that are advocating a change, and it doesn't have to be a change immediately necessarily, but it's providing ammunition for a relook in 2021.
Yeah. Years ago, somebody said, it was in a law firm that did not have a bonus pool, but there was a discussion, do we need a bonus pool? And they were thinking something relatively modest. And I think for them, relatively modest was like 5% of their net income. They were going to put into a bonus pool. And if people earned bonuses, great. And if they didn't, that money would just go back into the normal compensation system. And I remember a partner said to me, it's like, you know, that's like throwing red meat to lions. We're all going to kill each other over that 5%. We're so much better off just focusing on the 95% or really the 100% and making that as big as possible. I think there's going to be, for firms that have like a sizable bonus pool, there's going to be a lot of positioning and fighting over those dollars. And it's going to be again a challenge.
And the problem is it's usually subjective.
Yeah.
Basis,
right? Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, somebody once said, you know, in a football field, you know, why is it it's the last 5 yards are so difficult? Meaning, you know, with a bonus pool, you got $10,000 and people fight like cats and dogs over that portion of that $10,000. So, Bill, I take your point.
So a lot of firms have made cuts across the board just in response to COVID. What do you say to those firms that have either made those cuts and need to readjust, kind of looking towards 2020, or need to make further cuts? What's that look like?
Yeah. Peter, I guess I'll go first. I guess after the first half of the year went by and firms did pretty well, I started to hear a bit of pressure from firm leadership saying, well, our partners are really scratching their heads saying, why do we make these cuts to our draws? Can we reinstate them now? That sort of, can we reinstate and go back to the normal draws, or can we reinstate, go back to the normal draws? And also, can we make them retroactive? Because there were 3 or 4 months there where I wasn't getting my full draw, and I'd like to get that too. And what was interesting about it, it's sort of like a salary mentality, like you're an employee and you withheld my money and now I want it. In every one of those instances, I told the leadership, I'm like, I wouldn't do it. There's just way too much uncertainty right now to say, okay, I'm making this up. We cut partner compensation 15%, and now we're going to go back. What if you have to cut it again in 3 months? Because when I think about how the economy changed and COVID hit, it was like somebody flipped a switch. And how do you know that some other horrible switch isn't going to get flipped again a month from now? So you're much better off not making any kind of increases or not returning the draws back to where they were. And if perchance you have a very strong second half of the year and you're doing well financially, well, there's no reason you can't make a supplemental distribution at some point in the future to do kind of a catch up. But trying to make a change now when you've got more or less 6 months left in the year seems a bit dicey to me. So I wouldn't make any change to compensation. I know that too, a number of firms, and this isn't for the equity partners so much as it for everybody else. I recall that when they made the compensation adjustment announcements, many of them put a time frame on it. For the next 4 months, we're going to lower everybody's compensation 10%. I think the clock is ticking on that, and I think we're gonna start hearing, that 10% reduction, it's going to be reversed, isn't it? On August 15th or whenever. And I think on that, I'm a little bit cautious too. I'm thinking, no, I think you're better off preserving cash rather than making changes and increasing comp. And in terms of what's going to happen in the future in terms of perhaps some additional cuts, kind of remains to be seen. A lot, it's done day by day again based on how cash flow looks. I think the challenge in any next phase of compensation cuts is how will they be done? Will they be done sort of pro rata across the board? Kind of this 15% thing will go from like 15% to 20% and everybody just gets hit 20%? Or is it going to be done kind of more individual? So you're at 20%, you're at 15%, maybe you're going to go back up to 10%. I don't really know. And I think that goes to, again, the culture of it's two things. It goes to the culture of the firm and whether or not it's a sharing environment. I guess it also goes to a certain extent to retention. And if we cut everybody across the board 20%, are we at risk of losing folks? And if the answer to that is yes, and those are the folks that you need to make sure that you're stable for the rest of the year, firms may take another look at some of those reductions, and they may do it sort of piecemeal. Certain people go down, certain people don't.
And that's the way I'm seeing it. I certainly agree with you, Bill, that you can't take the first few months and say we've done a great job and make any comparison to what the rest of the year is going to look like at all. And you need to save that money. Now, in terms of cuts going forward, I think we just read about some large firms that are in their second wave of cuts. I do not recommend that. I was in favor of across the board cuts at 10, 15, whatever the percentage was. I think that was fair. I also think, to your point, Bill, it goes to communication. We're going to have, for the next 3 months, we're going to have a reduction. And at that time, we'll reevaluate the situation and we'll let you know what we've decided. As you know, it's the firm's best interest, et cetera. So a lot is in communication, so you don't set unrealistic expectations. To the extent that there are additional cuts, what I've seen firms do is put criteria together and take a look month by month. And if there's an opportunity for an earn back, if you're cut 25%, but at the end of July, your numbers are A, B, and C, then under that criteria, you get a a discretionary bonus, which could even be in excess of the 25% that's cut. To your point, you can't lose your best performers. And the recruiters are looking at those people who may be disappointed that they've been cut as much as everybody else when they're producing more.
So I've heard that third quarter is projected to be the worst quarter for a lot of our firms. And as we move towards the end of the year, they're going to be in panic mode coming out of that. As clients are slower to pay and we have this kind of perfect storm brewing, they're going to be asking for more discounts, delay on payment. How do we advise firms, or how would you advise firms to get those collections in before the end of the year without getting a huge impact as it relates to their any discounts that they're going to have to offer or delay in payment?
Well, discounts, the big joke is, all these alternative fee agreements, the most significantly, the most used is the discount. And that's not going to go away. Clients are asking and taking discounts. They're the final arbiter of value. And the article in American Lawyer last week was talking about how the largest firms are reducing their hourly rate from $750 to $500, et cetera. So they're not going away. I think firms need to be more aggressive and can't be used as a bank. Getting paid quickly needs to be a priority. And there's some things they can actually do better to ensure that they get paid more quickly or that they get paid at all. And one is lawyers are not very good at having tough discussions, either with each other or certainly with clients. This is down in the weeds, but I'll say it anyhow. If you're going to send out a bill, particularly now to a client, and it's a large bill, you pick up the phone and tell the client that the bill is coming and what it is, and ask them to call you if they have any questions. And then remind them and personalize it. Say, look, we're all in this together, but it would be of great help to me personally if you get this paid by the end of the month. Does that sound like you're groveling, you're begging? I don't think so. I think you're being professional and you're creating expectations. Just sending a past due notice without that phone call, it doesn't work. So you need to get the lawyers involved in those collections. And new clients state the obvious. Retainers aren't a bad thing, and an evergreen retainer is even better. And I think that, and when they do pay, actually pick up the phone and say thank you.
I think Peter, you mentioned that partners are often not great at having difficult conversations. Sometimes they're not great at papering the discussions they actually have with a client in terms of getting a good engagement letter, and having a very clear engagement letter. This is the terms of our representation of you as a client. The firms I've worked with, I think they don't even have engagement letters. It's very loose. I worry a little bit about what's happening in 2020, because I think I saw this back in 2008 and 2009, because there's not a massive pool of work available for people. Law firms lower their client intake hurdle. And as a result, clients come into the firm for matters. People maybe aren't as busy as they usually would be. So the firm says, we'll take it on. So then you take it on and you make an investment and you start doing the work, and all of a sudden you have essentially a bad client, and it leads to greater write-offs. To a certain extent, I think if it's between bringing in a client that's going to be a headache in terms of billing and collection, possibly down the road a future conflict issue, maybe even a potential malpractice issue, it's a really a flaky client, you're better off keeping that client outside of the doors of the firm. Focus instead on the business development and what can you do to actually go out and secure the kinds of clients that you really want to represent, who will ultimately pay their bills. But again, it kind of goes back to what Peter and I were talking about earlier. As we approach year end, the best thing you can do is focus on your current hygiene, getting your bills out, focusing on the clients. Peter's concepts about having a personal touch is fantastic. I completely agree with that, to help kind of smooth the client relationship and making sure the firm is actually paid for the work that it's doing.
That's great. I love the client conversation piece. I think that that's an important thread that we need to be pounding on. We did have a question from our audience. How are you seeing staff step up to help out in new or different ways to ensure that the firm remains profitable?
That's a great question, and an overlooked group of people, frankly. Many of the lawyers can work from home, and many do work from home. Many of staff don't have that luxury and don't have that ability to work from home. And they have been coming in to offices to do the mail or to documents, requests, et cetera. And I think they're the backbone of the organization and sometimes underappreciated. And they've done a great job in supporting the lawyers, while the lawyers are at home and they are not, because so that was a great question.
I completely agree on that. I think there had been a period where within the firms, law firm partners, some partners would think, boy, the amount of dollars that we're spending on overhead is ridiculous. You know, overhead being staff and everything. The amount of overhead dollars we're spending is ridiculous. We've got to cut overhead, cut, because that's how we're going to increase profitability, which in the short term is probably right. Cut expenses, you're going to increase profitability. I think the emergency switch to a work from home environment that every firm had to go to highlighted the importance of having great staff, and great staff that was able to seamlessly transition where the technology works, the business development is still happening, the mail is getting routed, all of these things. I actually think we're going to come out of this. Hopefully it'll be long-term and not short-term, but I think we're going to come out of this with a heightened level of appreciation for all of the effort that the administrative staff does to keep the firm running. Now, that's not to say that there have been firms that I've been in where the partners will say, you know, I think the administrative staff thinks that we work for them rather than really they're here to support us. I don't think we're going to get to that point, but I do think there's going to be a good appreciation for this is a team. Partners, associates, counsel, the paralegals, the secretaries, the whole group, it's a team and we work together, and without all the team members, this is not as successful as it can be. So I think this has been a great opportunity and it's been a great experience to elevate the importance of really strong administrative professionals.
You know, and talking about teamwork, and there's another question about staff who've been working from home and running out of work because lack of filing, et cetera, and what can be done to keep them. And I think the savvy law firms are saying, look, right now with PPP, and that'll be running out, I get it, and the opportunity to work 50% and bringing some people in 50%, everybody in 50%, and then they can get unemployment, et cetera. I think firms need to figure out a way how to retain the valuable support staff that they have. But the reality is that may not be sustainable if we don't get out of this COVID, if we don't find a cure, if we don't find a vaccine. That can only go on for so long. But I think firms are doing a pretty good job of trying to keep the team together.
Yeah, I think this is a huge opportunity for legal administrators because we see things a little bit differently. So, you know, the question was asked, you know, what can we be doing to keep staff and to keep them if they're running out of work? And I would encourage them to step up and start thinking about things differently. That's what we were taught in at GW, Bill, is to, you know, challenge the status quo and to raise our hand because we are kind of that central data piece of the firm that kind of, you know, sees a lot of things happening at various times. And I would just encourage our panelists and our guests to, you know, step up and take that challenge and start to offer up those strategic ideas and be that valuable source. And I'm hopeful when you talk about overhead, I'm hopeful that occupancy costs will be that side of overhead that starts moving down so we can really appreciate and support our staff in different ways. So looking towards the future, as firms begin the budgeting process, we talked a lot about that. How will budgets fare? What's going to be cut? What's going to be invested in as we look towards, the 2021 budgets?
I expect firms are going to go through a similar budgeting process at the end of this year that they have in the past, but they're going to be focused much more on what's our return on investment, and are there, line item by line item. And I think some firms have been pretty careful about this generally. Not all though, because I think when firms were really kind of flush with cash and things were going really well, they may have been a little bit loose about, we need those subscriptions. We need to attend those seminars. We need to do this kind of business development. We need to spend dollars here, there, and everywhere. I think they're going to be much more careful and saying, okay, are we getting a return on this? Is this important for us? And is it important for our clients? If the answer is yes, then green light. That's great. Maybe we're going to scale it down a bit, but green light. Jill, you mentioned a moment ago occupancy. I think occupancy is going to be it's going to be a very hot item. So the challenges here are, for so many firms, they are in long-term leases. So you have an office lease in Atlanta or whatever for the next 12 years. It's not like you can get out of it. You can't just say, okay, hey, you know what? We like this work from home thing, and we're gonna leave and here, take your space back. It's just not going to work that way. So you're stuck with that chunk of your revenue being absorbed by occupancy. And I don't know, when we come out of this, I don't know what occupancy looks like. And it's way outside of my sort of sphere of expertise, which is, as Peter will say, it's very tiny anyway. It's possible that firms are going to need more space because of social distancing. Right. So I've seen, firms used to have palaces, and it was 1,200 square foot per lawyer, and then 1,000, then 900, then 800. Then all of a sudden last year, I'm hearing 575 square foot per lawyer. I don't think that works in a social distance environment, unless, particularly if you have everybody in the space. If you do hoteling or something like that, it might work. But occupancy, people are going to be staring at that as part of budget. I don't think they're going to be able to do very much with it, though, unfortunately.
Well, Bill, I've actually interviewed a number of national landlords asking what they're seeing from their law firm clients, and of course, they're not going to say, "Oh, we give concessions left, right, and center." But certainly the retail clients have gotten a lot of concessions. Many of them aren't in business anymore, but the ones that have gotten either amortization over a much longer period of time, or just based on percentage rent as opposed to base rent. And it won't be long before I think law firms, particularly after PPP, some of which was used to pay for the occupancy cost, once that's depleted, I think you're going to see law firms go to their landlords and start to partner with them. Because don't forget, we're in leases now, many of which have no personal guarantees,
right?
And maybe a small line of credit. So I think you're going to see in the future, next year, you're going to see a lot more negotiations with landlords for rent reductions.
We did have another question from the audience I want to pose to you all. Have any firms conducted formal training coaching for their lawyers on how lawyers can make personal touch calls? For example, templates of questions, etc.
Well, the answer is yes. And our moderator right here is somebody who does that. Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, call me 1-800-HELP-ME. Jill is very helpful in putting and her team is helpful in working with attorneys to have those conversations. A lot of times clients don't even like to lawyers don't like to talk to clients. Now more than ever, by the way, in some of the client interviews that I've done during COVID, clients really enjoy having their attorneys call and ask them how they're doing. And lawyers aren't very good at doing that. So the short answer to the question is yes, people can help you with that, and you're looking at one of them. Not me, Jill.
Back to the client conversations, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we've got a few minutes left. I just want to have some parting words for you guys. Any words of wisdom or nuggets that you'd like to pass along to our guests?
I would like, I'm not sure it's a nugget, but there's something that we didn't touch upon that I want to touch upon, and that is the working from home phenomenon, whatever, the working from home. I think it's great. I think it's novel. I think people are doing much better than they did before, and that they thought that they were going to do. Technology is wonderful. However, we all do a lot of coaching, and in the calls that I've done, I found some of the attorneys with whom I've been speaking are getting burnt or missing the socialization, aren't as sharp, and they acknowledge they're not as sharp or as productive as they were in the first couple of months. So I think that working from home is wonderful, but it's a Faustian choice. I think ultimately we need to have a combination of two, and that's why I don't see the next 6 months to be as productive as the first 6 months. And that goes for associate training, mentoring, et cetera. So I have more to say about that, but I'm not going to, and I'll let Bill comment, and then we can say our parting words.
Yeah, Peter, I think you're right on that, on the work from home piece. People had to react to it immediately. They did. It worked pretty successfully, which was great. But there are so many firms that I've gone into where I've heard from partners or even associates that the thing that I really love about this place is that I can walk down the hall and I can ask somebody a stupid question and it leads to a 45-minute conversation and I learn a lot. I think all of that is sort of disappearing right now. And it was okay for a little while, but it's not going to be okay long term. I did have a partner mention to me the other day, and I thought it was interesting. I hadn't even thought about it. It's like, in a way, when I'm dealing, this is a sort of more senior partner, when I'm dealing with associates, I was worried about kind of getting to know them. But because we have to do this technologically, he's like, I almost feel like there's an intimacy here that I miss in the office because he's looking in my house and I'm looking in his house or her, I can't remember what it was. But he's like, that's an interesting intimacy. I had no idea. I hadn't given any consideration to that whatsoever, but you get to know people a little bit differently. For example, I've got this ridiculous brick wall in my house. So it's different, but I think it's different, okay, in the short term. If we have to do this for the next 5 years, we're going to be going crazy. So hopefully sooner rather than later, we're going to get back to something that's a bit more.
And you'll get rid of the brick wall.
No, it's going to go on this side too.
Okay, got it.
I've actually heard that, Bill, from a lot of our colleagues that are in-house on the marketing BD side, that attorneys treat them differently now because it's more human. It's more humanized.
It's really interesting. Well, being more human, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. All right. Any final parting words for you guys?
Well,
nice.
It's interesting 6 months.
Yeah. It's hard to find silver linings in a pandemic that has, gotten people so sick but there, I'm Pollyanna. I'm hopeful that some good will come out of this, not only for lawyers but for everybody. But in the meantime, Jill and Society 54, thank you for inviting me to participate. It's always nice to catch up with you all. And to everybody who's on this call, be safe, be careful, and as someone famous, not me, said, be kind.
Well said, Peter.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We are just going to promote our next coffee talk. We do coffee talks every other week where we just get people together for a roundtable, and that's going to be on Friday the 24th. We're doing it at noon so we can accommodate our West Coast friends because the 9 o'clock hour, 6 a.m. was a little bit too early for them. So please join us for that. And we're going to have our final webinar in this series in August at some point. So more information will be sent out. Because this is Thirsty Thursday, I hope you all have a drink in your hand. I do. I got my beer and it's 5 o'clock. So I'm going to give you all a toast. May you have the hindsight to know where you've been, the foresight to know where you're going, and the insight to know where you've gone too far. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all have a great day and Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.